Hello and welcome everyone. Today, I have a sad news that I would like to share before we start the webinar. Our dear Secretary Norman Mineta, he is actually the first Asian American Cabinet Secretary that had passed away today. And he has done so much for the Asian American community. And I would just want to take this time and have a moment of silence for him, and so that we can remember all the good things that he has done for us. Hello again. My name is Esther Lee, the president of the Chinese American Heritage Foundation. We are excited to have Michael Truong, the executive director of Chinese American Museum in Los Angeles, to share with us about the museum. Michael's intended career goal was to become an urban planner. His trajectory changed course when he became an intern at the Chinese American Museum in Los Angeles in 2005. After stepping away from the organization for several years, Michael returned to CAM as the museum educator and has curated several exhibitions. His role was later expanded to include managing the operation of the organization. In 2019, he became CAM's executive director, and in this position, he continued to develop CAM as a local and national resource for sharing the experience of Chinese American through exhibition, visual arts, and public programming. Through his earlier tenure as the executive director, CAM has deepened relationship with local agencies, include the Los Angeles Grant Park and the City of Los Angeles Public Library System. This evening, he has also invited his colleague to join him, and I'll let Michael do the introduction later. And just a reminder, if you have any question during or after the presentation, please type them in the Q&A box rather than in the chat box. It will be easier for me to see them in just one place. So without further ado, here is Michael Truong.
Thank you, Esther, for inviting the Chinese American Museum to participate in today's program. You know, we felt that it's really important for us to really be a space that is able to continue with the ability to not just share what the Chinese American Museum does in a local level, but also on a national level. So thank you again for the invitation. And we do want to also send our condolences to the individual that passed. So, and yeah, thank you again. As you know, Esther mentioned, I am the Chinese American Museum Executive Director. I started as an intern in 2005 and had the opportunity to really grow with the museum as the museum started to grow along with me, actually. The Chinese American Museum opened its doors in 2005. I actually going to be screen sharing a quick presentation, screen sharing my screen to go through our history of the Chinese American Museum. So as I mentioned, the museum opened in 2003 and we're located in the Garnier Building in downtown Los Angeles. I will get to information more about the significance of this particular building, but at this time with the museum's opening, you know, although we were extremely excited to open our doors in 2003, it took 20 years to actually open the museum itself. There were a lot of conversations regarding work with the community to first create interest to having a Chinese American museum, but then later on funding to support the museum's efforts. Initially, there's opportunities to have a space in the Garnier Building, this particular building, to host a case that shares the Chinese American experience in this building. And the community felt that wasn't enough and fought for a bay that eventually became the whole building itself. When the museum opened its doors in 2003, we were still occupying a portion of the building. And while it was being opened, or while it opened, the community continued to raise efforts and raise funds and is able to now have site control of the whole building. So our space, the Chinese American Museum, is a space that shares the Chinese American experience in Los Angeles and beyond. Our mission is to do the research, the preservation, and the sharing of the history and rich cultural legacy of our contributions in the United States. But before I begin to talk about the Chinese American Museum, I also want to take this time to really explore what is a museum. Quickly, a quick definition of a museum is a building or an institution that cares for and displays a collection of artifacts and other objects of artistic, cultural, and scientific importance. Typically a museum is a space or a building that has, walls. But what we learned during the pandemic, as all of us facing, I remember the time sitting at my desk as I am right now, receiving the phone call from my general manager in the city of LA, where the mayor asked us to close our doors for 2 weeks in the middle of March. And then 2 weeks became 2 months, and then close to 2 years we're dealing with this pandemic. And as we were closed, the board and the staff had to really think about who we were when we didn't have a gallery or didn't have a space. What does it mean to have a museum without its doors and out its galleries? On top of this, top of being closed, we're also seeing this increase in anti-Asian hate that was happening since the beginning of the pandemic. And again, this was an increase, not a new aspect towards our community. And with this new lens of this anti-Asian hate, we've seen so many community members who are basically saying that, we need to look at institutions like the Chinese American Museum to understand the history of Chinese Americans, so history won't be repeated again. And as we see the increase in anti-Asian hate, there's this new spotlight on institutions like the Chinese American Museum. And the board and the staff really had to think about ways that we're able to not just be a museum, but be a community resource and a community center for those who are impacted by the pandemic, but also a resource educational center for those who needs to have, where we can provide the historical context for why dangerous rhetoric, would lead to violence. We've seen that during the pandemic. When you first enter the Chinese American Museum, you'll see an exhibition called Journeys. This is a timeline of Chinese American history dating from the Gold Rush up until we opened in 2003. So this is a space where we can actually have a dialogue with our visitors and students who are coming in to get an introduction to this rich cultural history of Chinese Americans. When I started at the Chinese American Museum as an intern, I was working in the public relations department. And 2 years later, I became the museum's educator. So my role was to provide a tour of the Chinese American Museum to students and curate the exhibitions. And with these conversations about Chinese working in the United States and where they were and why they were entering, a lot of times these was a new concept for many visitors who are coming into the Chinese American Museum. This is a different angle of their gallery to give you all an idea of what the timeline looks like. It's a very cohesive timeline that breaks in between the top is national and world events that impacts migration or Chinese American history. And below the line here is really explains laws and legislation that specifically impacts Chinese Americans, Chinese immigrants, and Chinese Americans in the United States. And this is an opportunity where we introduce the concept of Chinese migration into the United States with the Gold Rush. So as many of y'all may know, the Gold Rush was started in 1848. 3,000 Chinese came into the United States in 1848. And in 1852, 20,000 Chinese came over to the United States. And out of the 20,000, only 17 were women. And this is an opportunity for us to introduce the concept of not just migration, but of gender roles, which is really important to understand the complexity of Chinese Americans living in the United States at the time. We also introduced the Chinese working on the railroad. the first transcontinental railroad in the United States that connected the East Coast and West Coast together. So by the end of 1852, we have about 20,000 Chinese who were brought to California to work on the railroad and on the mining and whatnot. And as we talk about gender roles, the Chinese also, monopolize the laundry business. We're talking about a group of men who came over to California who had a force to work in manual labor, right? And then have other opportunities elsewhere. And you also have, especially in California, where it was a predominantly men's society. And a lot of these men refuse to do their own laundry. So there's stories that we're reading and research that we're doing where a lot of these men who refused to do their own laundry because it was viewed as women's work, and they were shipped their clothes to Hawaii to get it washed, and sometimes get shipped back to the United States or to California specifically. So the Chinese who were in the laundry business monopolized and were able to create a sector of the economy that they're able to monopolize and be protected and not, have any other competition, but also led into, specific gender roles and stereotypes of, Chinese Americans historically. And this is also a list of certain contributions of Chinese and Chinese Americans in California. We have agriculture, restaurants, fishing, laundry businesses, and urban medicine. But on top of the contributions of Chinese in the United States, we also have to introduce this aspect of the anti-Chinese sentiment that also increased too. You had Dennis Kearney from the Working Man's Party in California that created the slogan, "The Chinese must go." And this aspect of this rhetoric, "The Chinese must go," was very dangerous because it also led to other racist and legislation, such as the CAHF Act in 1875 that prevented Chinese women from entering the United States, therefore preventing Chinese families from settling in the United States. We've seen an increase in anti-Chinese violence and attacks, including Los Angeles, Wyoming, Oregon, Washington, and whatnot. And eventually the passing of the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, a law that's supposed to only last for 10 years, got now extended for another 10 years in 1892, got extended for another 10 years in 1902, and in 1904, it got extended indefinite to its repeal in 1943. So by 1882 to 1943, Chinese exclusion was enacted where Chinese laborers were not able to enter the United States, but you're a teacher, a student, a government official, a merchant, you are able to come into the United States. But if you want to come here to support your family, you would deny that entry. On top of that, if you were living in the United States, you were not allowed to be naturalized to become a United States citizen. And that was also very key into the impact of rights for Chinese and Chinese Americans at this time. And so as we talk to students about the issues of these increased anti-Chinese sentiment, we also introduced the aspect of propaganda and marketing. We have this flyer that you see here. It's that it advertises laundry. And we asked, these students, why would buying laundry detergent help? It's propaganda. And it links into this history of Chinese working in the laundry business. If you're to buy the laundry detergent from the magic washer, you no longer need to be dependent on Chinese laborers work on Chinese laundry workers, and therefore, you're able to exile the Chinese from the United States. So these are, again, dangerous rhetorics that are told historically that really impact the Chinese American community, and we can see the violence that can lead because of these types of propaganda. Right. These are some of the photographs. On top of the timeline, we also have artifacts in the gallery. So these are some photographs of some of the artifacts that you would be able to see in the gallery. If you were able to join us yesterday with the talk regarding Angel Island with Ed, he actually showed a video of Taurus Wang, a Chinese American artist who talked about his life and his experience at Angel Island. In our exhibition, we have Tyrus Wang's coaching papers that he used to allow himself to pass interrogations in order to come into the United States. And we have a colleague here, Kavine, who is actually in the gallery right now, and we'd like to give all of you an opportunity just to see what the Journeys exhibition looks like. I do want to ask if you are feeling, we have choreographed this movement to make sure that it's very smooth, but if you are experiencing any motion sickness, please let us know in the chat and we'll change our motion. So I'll stop screen sharing and pass it over to Kavine.
Thank you, Michael, and happy AAPI Heritage Month to everyone here. I'll be showing you around our museum galleries, and our first stop is our permanent exhibition called Journeys.
Thank you, Kavine, for being in the gallery. You will be seeing Kavine several times throughout this presentation. And now, the Journeys exhibition provides an opportunity for us to explore Chinese America throughout the United States. But we also have other exhibitions that localize our conversation. So our Origins exhibition shares the stories of 3 Chinese American communities in Los Angeles. The first exhibition that we'll be talking about is the historic, it's in historic Chinatown. Chinatown in Los Angeles was the site of the current Union Station. Now, in 1852, there's the first reports of Chinese living in Los Angeles. And by the 1870s, we had less than 200 Chinese living in the United States. 200 Chinese living in Los Angeles. But as we talk about, the challenges that the Chinese had to overcome, we talk about Chinese Exclusion Act, and we talk about the violence that was spread throughout the United States. On a local level, we saw that with the Los Angeles Chinese Massacre of 1871, where 500 Los Angelinos came in and killed 18 boys and men. And it's considered to be one of the worst lynching that happened west of the Mississippi, right? And so as we talk to students about this incident, we talk about the importance of understanding history, importance of how dangerous rhetoric, like what we hear today during the pandemic, the Kung flu or the China virus, can lead to violence, because we've seen that historically, especially in Los Angeles, where slogans like the Chinese must go or the propaganda that we just have shown can lead to violence. And if we don't remember these acts of these issues that are facing our community, it may be repeated again. So as the Chinese Americans, we were able to continue to commemorate this event. So it would be a reminder that, historic events in Los Angeles happen, so it won't be repeated again. And what's interesting about this particular event was, after this event happened in Los Angeles, news about this tragic event, this horrific tragedy, spread throughout the United States. And Los Angeles ended up cleaning up this act and made sure that, they were able to make it nicer and more inviting for many, for the folks living in Los Angeles because of the bad PR. So on top of doing that, it really washed away the story of the Chinese Massacre. So the museum, again, commemorates this every year as a way to remember this horrific history. And last year was the 150th anniversary of the Chinese Massacre in Los Angeles. And the Chinese American Museum created 8 days of programming as a way to provide remembrance for this event, but also as a way to remember those who were lost and passed during this horrific event. The Origins exhibition also talks about what does it mean to construct a community. So you have these anti-Chinese sentiment increasing throughout the United States and in Los Angeles, but at the same time, the Chinese Americans or Chinese immigrants were able to overcome these obstacles and overcome these acts of violence and constructed communities, not just in Los Angeles, but also in throughout the United States, San Francisco, New York, and other locales. And we explore what is the construct of community, what is needed, what is the infrastructure and the social services and the opportunities are needed to create communities here in Los Angeles. So, we have individuals who were vegetable peddlers who are not only farming their own food and selling it to, the Chinese who are living in their Los Angeles, but also selling it to other folks. There were peddlers selling it to residents, to hotels, and to businesses. So for a period of time, the Chinese monopolized vegetables and vegetable peddling in Los Angeles. On top of that aspects of occupation, the Chinese opened up restaurants, they opened up laundry businesses, and the ways that they were able to sustain the livelihood here in Los Angeles. On top of work and employment, we have organizations such as the Chinese Consultant Benevolent Association that really helped immigrants seek employment, but also provide living quarters for those who are recently arrived into the United States, to provide legal services, marital services, and to dealt with issues of immigration, and also business transactions and translation services. If you have contracts in English or anything in English, they're able to provide those translations for the aspects. And you also have overseas organizations such as the Tongwa hospitals, who, if you end up passing in Los Angeles or in the United States, this overseas organization was able to receive the bodies of those who passed in the United States, so they could be buried in the family burial grounds back in China. So it's this concept of being able to not just sustain a livelihood in Los Angeles, but also being connected back into roots of China and whatnot, and bringing the cultures and traditions along at the same time. Because, if you end up passing in this locale, you want to be, your spirits will want to be with family members and whatnot. You also have the Chinese American Citizens Alliance that started in San Francisco, but also had a chapter in Los Angeles. And they're the first civil rights organization advocating for Chinese and Chinese Americans. This photo here is their offices here in the Garnier building. So this is something that we're very appreciative, because the Garnier building is home to the Chinese American Museum, and you have services like the Chinese Consultant Benevolent Association in this building, and you also have the Chinese American Citizens Alliance in this building, and also the Sunny Roll store in this building. Also, you have general stores, you have offices, and you have people, Chinese, who are living in this building. And this building was constructed in 1890 and has only been occupied by the Chinese. So when there's an opportunity for the Chinese Americans to have a space to tell the story, it also needed to know that it needed to be in the Garnier building to continue to tell the stories of Chinese in Los Angeles, but also to reclaim a history that's once forgotten. Because when we think about Chinatown in Los Angeles, we think about the current Chinatown as we know today, but not understanding the fact that there is a longer, deeper, richer history of Chinese in Los Angeles in a different location. And remnants of that history is removed only a few buildings behind, including the Garnier building itself. And I would pass it back over to Kavine, so she would be able to give you all a tour of the Origins exhibition.
Thank you, Michael. Here is our Origins exhibition, Historic Chinatown. Please enjoy. Now I'll be showing you this exhibit called Sewing Wool Store, which was once home at the Gardner Building. And it was here between 1891 to 1948. And this store was a multi-purpose space that served in the community.
Thank you, Kavine, again for showing us the exhibition downstairs. While she's making her way upstairs, I'll be continue our presentation. So when we talk about the Chinatown as we know today in Los Angeles, we have to talk about the history of Los Angeles itself. You have the railroad tracks that are spread throughout the city, and the city decided to unify the railroad tracks and created Union Station. And as the city, they chose Chinatown as the site to construct Union Station. So with the construction of Union Station, the Chinese were displaced and moved to the Chinatown as we know today. So that happened in the 1930s. And in the 1940s, you have the construction of the 101 freeway, where the state of California demolished the rest of historic Chinatown, and again, leaving only a few buildings behind. So the Garnier building, again, home to the Chinese American Museum, used to be a lot longer. But then with the construction of 101 freeway, a portion of the building was removed, and this is all that is left. And this building has been left vacant since the construction of the 101 freeway until the museum moved into the space in 2003. And in order to understand the construction of the unique construction and development of the current Chinatown, we also have to explore the real estate restrictions that are happening at the time. You have the California Alien Land Law of 1913 and 1920 that restricted anybody who is ineligible to become a US citizen to not be able to either own or lease land. So, for Chinese, because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, they were not allowed to own, they were not allowed to be naturalized. So therefore, they're not allowed to own land. And one way to circumvent that particular law was a lot of family members were actually putting the names of the child who were born in the United States or born in the location. And so they have property rights and versus the parents having the property rights. And then you also have racially restricted covenants that even if you have the ability to move outside of a specific location, sometimes deeds of households would indicate that you cannot sell to someone of Asian descent or someone of, African or Latino descent. So a lot of times the Chinese were restricted into where they were able to live. So in order to really develop Chinatown that we know today, the community activists and community members created the Los Angeles Chinatown Corporation. And as a corporation, they're able to purchase the land, and merchants were able to buy stocks into the corporation. And it was a partnership between the community members, but also with the city of Los Angeles, who was displacing their original community. And on top of the landowners who own the site of this particular building, the particular land, I'm sorry, and whatnot. And so, the Chinatown was the first, this Chinatown, Los Angeles, was the first Chinatown that was created and occupied and developed by Chinese and Chinese Americans. When we think about historically Chinatowns in New York and San Francisco, it was a place where they were forced to live as they migrated into the location. But this particular Chinatown was developed and created by the Chinese who were living here at the time. And with this development, they created so many of these types of buildings that were very ornate. And one of the aspects of this type of design was not just to celebrate the culture and cultural identity, but because of this time period where opportunities to go beyond manual labor or business owner or being a business owner was few to none, that a lot of these business owners had to rely on cultural tourism to support the family members and support their livelihood. So you have this creation of Chinatown as not just a place of refuge for those who were displaced, but also a place that attract tourism as a way to increase revenue for the community so they could be able to survive in Los Angeles. But not only was Chinatown a place for merchants to support their livelihoods, it was also a place where they were able to celebrate culture. So we see the Chinese Moon Festival, and this is an advertisement here from the 1941, and they also have a Chinese New Year that was also being celebrated too. So it's this opportunity to sustain the livelihood at the same time celebrating the culture and cultural identity. And then you have families who are settling in the community, and as individuals who's growing up as Chinese Americans, they start to adapt and acculturate to American society and see recreational sports or other avenues that they want to participate in, but due to discrimination or racism at the time, they were not allowed to participate. So they're formed their own leagues, like Chinese Americans were creating their own basketball team, and you have the Maywark drumming corps were formed by Chinese American women and girls in Chinatown, and they became a drum corps, and they were performed throughout Los Angeles, and also travel to, I believe, to Vegas and whatnot, and perform as a collective. So even when they were faced with discriminatory actions where they were not allowed to participate in certain things, they were able to formulate their own groups in order to participate in a larger American or lifestyle. And throughout the creations of living in California, we also see restrictions start to be lifted, not specifically, removed, but you see it being lifted. So you have, the Chinese Exclusion Act being repealed in 1943, the California Alien Land Law repealed in 1952, Civil Rights Acts in the 1960s, but also the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act that increases the Chinese immigration from 105 to 20,000 annually. And you had the creation of Monterey Park. And what's interesting about Monterey Park was the fact that it was a suburban community. It was a very bedroom community. And I was born in Monterey Park, and growing up in this community now, I always wonder why the Chinese chose Monterey Park as its location. And it's something that I questioned for a very long time. And even when I started to work at the Chinese American Museum, it's always in the back of my mind. And when there's an opportunity to create an exhibit that talks about Monterey Park, I had the opportunity to write the narrative and curate the space. And what I learned was the fact that, Monterey Park became the community it was today was due to marketing. It was marketed as the Asian Beverly Hills of, the Asian Beverly Hills. So, with things that were lifted, with the quota system lifted in 1965 Immigration Act was passed, it really prioritize high-skilled laborers. So those who were privileged and those who were educated. So if you were privileged coming from Hong Kong or Taiwan and you want to settle in Los Angeles, you settle in the Asian Beverly Hills. And with this influx of immigrants coming into the location, you also have businesses that are catering to the community. You have stores that are catering to the community. And, and this is a photograph of one of our exhibitions that kind of that shares the vast migration into Monterey Park for Chinese Americans. But as we've seen from history, as people are moving into the communities, the folks who live in Monterey Park were not faced with the types of discrimination that folks who came here as minors were facing, but they're facing issues of other acts of discrimination or racist legislation, such as English is official language petition, where signing this would make English the official language of the city. But what also meant was, if there's any advertisement, it has to be in English, and it caused a lot of issues because it questioned, like, does libraries only have to hold books that are in Chinese, in English? Can they not have books in Chinese or other languages? If you have to call for emergency services, are you able to provide translation services if English was the official language? And, so we see this influx of the Chinese who are facing a different type of discrimination. And you have individuals or community members who became more politically active to be the voice of the community. So you have Judy Chu, who's now a Congress member for the district, who started in the school board and then became city council, who became the voice for the community and whatnot. So I'm gonna pass it over to Kavine to give you a view of this exhibition.
Thank you, Michael. Now I'll be showing you all our exhibition here on the mezzanine floor at the Chinese American Museum.
Thank you, Kavine, for doing that for us. And now I'm gonna screen share again. And as I'm preparing this presentation, when the museum closed to the public, we had to think about ways that we want to reopen the museum. So we had the opportunity to open limited hours in September of last year. And with that opening, we wanted to create an exhibit that really allowed our community to reflect on the pandemic, especially with the increased anti-Asian hate, but not just remember what the community was facing, but also provide a message of unity and also of strength. So we actually created an exhibition called Collective Resilience, which is a mural show that invited 7 artists to create artwork based on their reflection on the pandemic, and then how the community is able to move forward with their own visual words. This exhibit is now open to October 2nd. And let me get situated again. And so this is some of the murals that you will see here. This is by Lauren YS. They created this exhibition to celebrate the community, but also as a way to move forward and leaving this hate and moving forward to something more positive. Another portion of another mural that you will see in the gallery is by Hunt's. Hunt's piece is interesting because as an artist, he creates art that is really tiny and he's mainly on paper. So this is one of the very few times and opportunities that he's able to use spray paint and create something a lot larger. And for him, he created this artwork that talks about the chaos that we all feel, but it also can be contained within this geographical sphere. So allowing us to think about moving forward and moving past things that we're experiencing during the pandemic. This is another angle of the exhibition, but we also know that we cannot do this exhibition justice with just photographs. So I'm actually going to invite Kavine back into this conversation so she can give you all a walkthrough of this exhibition.
Thank you, Michael. Please enjoy this exhibition. Now I'll be walking over to the other side of the gallery to show you all different mural, and I'm going to be turning off my camera to not give you all any motion sickness.
So, you know, when the museum, in 2020, we actually had an exhibition called the Red Envelope Show, and we also utilized several murals in the gallery. And there's one particular mural of Anime Wong that we had in 2020. We had such a hard time thinking about painting it over because it's such a beautiful mural. So when we created the Collective Resilience show, we felt that we could still keep this mural up because it has such a rich history and a rich story. And talking about Anime Wong in the gallery was very key to a collective resilience and unity and strength. Because, you know, she's, you know, one of the first Chinese, she is the first Chinese American actress that, you know, although she's able to be in Hollywood mainstream movies, the life in which she has to endure as an actress, trying to not just be a woman in the industry, but a woman of a person of color. So there's a lot of circumstances she had to face in her employment. So it's our way to honor her legacy is by keeping her mural. So I'll have Kavan show you the mural. And Kavan, we're going to ask you to take a step closer to the mural so our visitors can see some of the details. Thank you, Kavine. And just to, I know we were running short on time, so I do apologize, but just real quickly, what's next for CAM, right? We have exhibitions of plans. We're gonna be, we have celebrations of Asian Pacific Heritage Month on our own. So I hope that you're able to check our website, Chinese, camla.org. And learn more about our programming for Asian Pacific Heritage Month. But I also want to spotlight the fact that we are in the midst of expansion. These two, this end of the building you see here is currently vacant, and we are in the midst of expanding and creating more exhibition spaces for the Chinese American Museum. On top of constructing this expansion, we also are working on ways to create a unity garden that commemorates and provides a remembrance for those who had to endure tragic passings in Los Angeles due to racial and violent acts. And this is funded with $2 million from the state. And we are appreciative of the opportunity to really be a space that not just shares the Chinese American experience, but understand that the Chinese American experience is part of this American experience. And that, we're no longer a space that, asking people to hear our voices, but demanding the fact that we are included in the narrative. And that's something that the board and the staff has been striving to do since the pandemic. It's the need to understand that, our voices can be heard, but also should be heard. And we need to be involved in larger conversations to make sure that our history is included. So racial violence against our community would not be repeated again. So thank you so much. And I would like to invite Esther back into our conversation.
Okay. Okay, so Q&A time. Is Kaveen going to be in the Q&A as well?
She may, but I think that unless you're having questions about seeing things in the gallery, I think I could take it from here.
Okay, all right. One question is, during your presentation, you have mentioning a few times about classes and students. So do you have some rooms and do you have classes at the museum?
We conduct a lot of tours. So we work with a lot of school districts around the museum, and the board every year raises funds for bus funding because we know that field trips are the first things to get cut during during budget cuts. So we actually are subsidizing busing to come for students to come to the museum, and on top of the tour. We normally provide workshops for the students to deepen their understanding of the Chinese American experience. Due to the pandemic, we're not hosting any workshops now, but we are still providing tours for students who are coming to visit us.
See, okay. Next question. What's the annual operating cost to maintain this museum, if you are allowed to disclose that information?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what we pride ourselves is, our staff has been very dedicated to the work, and the board has been very dedicated to everything that we do. So we are a very lean machine. With the pandemic, we decided that we're going to lessen our budget to roughly $600,000. So, but, that allows us to maintain our operations, but not to lay anybody off. So during the 2 years of the pandemic, we are able to maintain our staff that we have here.
So does most of the funding comes from donation?
Most of the funding comes from private donations, our supporters. in addition to corporate and foundations. And now we're returning to now that we're over the pandemic, we're returning to a $1 million budget.
Wow. And next question, what are your outreach targets, school groups, community residents, or capture some bilingual?
We, in terms of bilingual, there's a lot of emerging schools throughout Los Angeles, and they're actually coming to the museum as a way to, introduce culture into the curriculum, their own curriculum. We work closely with LAUSD, the second largest, school districts, I believe. So Los Angeles Unified School District, to bring students to the museum. And we, our Kavine that you saw working with us, she's actually our community engagement coordinator. So our efforts is not just to bring people to the museum, but to go out into the community to share our experiences and to partner with different organizations and to have a more cohesive conversation.
This one, I don't know if we remember. Someone was asking, there's a laundry picture, a photo, and what are the Chinese characters above the door? Do you remember you showing one?
I remember showing the photograph and whatnot, but that's a good question in that aspect of it. That's something that I cannot tell you because I unfortunately do not read Chinese or understand Chinese on my end.
Okay. Okay, and another question, in addition to the beautiful and colorful murals, would you consider a mural featuring Shang-Chi and CAHF as that was such a big Asian American event for the community? And you believe the kids will love that?
Yeah, I think pop culture plays a huge role in understanding our community, right? And, while it may not be Shang-Chi itself, we are in efforts of creating future exhibitions that utilizes pop culture as a way to share our narrative. Because what's interesting, things like boba, which was once insular to the Chinese American community or the Asian American community, has now spread throughout the nation and became mainstream in certain aspects, right? So culture is a way for us to really introduce our culture, but also introduce our history. So you'll see the museum utilizing pop culture as a narrative in future exhibitions.
Okay. All right, so it's close to 9 o'clock. And again, I really, really want to thank you, Michael. You've done a beautiful presentation, and thank you, Kevin, for the virtual tour. I personally learned a lot, and I believe that's probably a lot that we should see, come to your museum to see it in person. I think that that's more history and more things to see. So I would encourage everybody to go to LA to visit CAM, and we can meet Michael and Kavin and everybody there in person. And so thank you very much. And I saw Michael already typed in the link, CAMLA.org. So it will have more info there. And I want to thank you all the attendees this evening, and hope that you guys enjoy as much as I did, and hope to see you tomorrow at our another webinar. So,
thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great night.